Good afternoon. I'm Raj Clemens. I'm chairing this particular session, and I want to also introduce two of my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Peter Pressman. Yay, Peter! And Dr. Wally Hayes. We're delighted today. We're going to try to put some common sense in understanding fats relative to saturated fats and cardiovascular disease and saturated fats in general. We also want to discuss aspects of cancer and palmitic acid, in particular C16, and then we'll wrap up some things relative to deforestation. So we're very, very fortunate. So basically here we're going to talk about palmitic acid and palm oil in particular because it's high level of palmitic acid, C16, which is a saturated fat. If you eat anything today in your life or today, you eat plants, insects, or meat, you will get palmitic acid. And you're humans, last time I checked, and all humans and all plants make palmitic acid. Ooh, that's a saturated fat. We all make it. Also, the GI tract. I did work at Johns Hopkins many years ago, a little school outside of Baltimore, and we looked at saturated fats in kids, because I was specialized in pediatrics, and kids grow, and you'll see why in a few moments. We also want to talk about cell-based studies, and particularly the one that suggested that palmitic acid contributes to carcinogenesis. And Dr. Peter Pressman and Dr. Wally Hayes will elaborate much more on that. And importantly, we want to look at, of course, deforestation practices, agricultural practices, and Rossa will talk a little bit about that today. So we're here for you for the next 90 minutes. Yay! But let's have some fun. Remember the first few letters in fundamentals? Fun. Let's have some fun with today's session. So with that, I said, so first of all, you're stuck with me. I'm the USC School of Pharmacy, but I'm here for you to understand. So we seek to understand. Francesco is really a great guy here from Italy, and he's going to talk about what you said, fatty acid, cardiovascular disease. Peter, Raj, and Wally will be here, and then David's going to talk about a little bit what's going on in sustainability, interesting programs with both in Malaysia as well as in Indonesia. With that, I will turn over to my friend. We'll talk about saturated fats. Francisco, come on.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. I would like to thank several people. The first one is Sarah from the Malaysian Palm Oil Council, and all of you for being here. So sometimes they tell me I give provocative talks. And what I want to say today is just to walk you through saturated fat in general and its effect on human health. So this is an American advertisement of many years ago. Now you're supposed to eat lots of butter because it's slippery. So it lubricates your arteries. And then it became prohibited, and now it's up again. So now you're supposed to eat butter. So in between these two advertisements, this is not an ad, this is just a Time magazine cover. You were supposed to avoid butter, avoid all saturated fat. Okay, 1 minute of biochemistry, and I apologize to the real biochemists here. When we eat fat, we eat triglycerols, more or less. We also eat phospholipids, and we divide fat into solid fat and oils. Oils are fat, okay? But it depends on the saturation degree. So solid fat is solid at room temperature, oils are fluid at room temperatures. And these triglycerols, they all contain fatty acids, of course, that can be saturated, no double bonds, monosaturated, one double bond, or polyunsaturated, two or more double bonds. The more double bonds, the more fluid they become. If they don't have double bonds, they are saturated fat, and they are sort of rigid, they're stiff, they're solid at room temperature. This is another way of looking at the same data. Saturated fatty acids, no. No, the issue now here is that we all group together saturated fat, or better yet, we all group together saturated fatty acids, and we put them in the same category. But you see, there are different lengths, and I didn't even put the four carbon chain, the 8 carbon chains that you find in milk, for example. So palmitic acid is different from lauric acid, it's different from stearic acid, and it's different from the smaller one. So it's a highly heterogeneous category. Okay, this is the mistake we all make is saturated fat. Yes, but it's a mixture of different saturated fatty acids. So if you go on the internet, there's a jazz piece called Compared to What? I think it's on 1963. You can find it. It's a very beautiful piece of music. This is the major issue when we study fatty acids and health. Should I use saturated fat or unsaturated fat? Monounsaturated or polyunsaturated? It's really complicated because if you take one away and put the other one and you see an effect, is it due to the fact that you took one away, or is it due to you cannot add? You cannot take people and give them olive oil. You cannot take people and give them butter because you increase the number of calories, okay? So you need to take butter away and give them olive oil, or vice versa, or give them seed oil. And then you see an effect. Is it due to the fact that you... So when you compare, when you study fat or fatty acids, it's always compared to what? Compared to one another one. And these are more or less the effects of saturated fat. Trans fatty acids, they should be avoided. They increase blood cholesterol. Saturated fat increases blood cholesterol. Polyunsaturated fat decreases blood cholesterol on average. And we'll see this in about 10 minutes. This is the global burden of disease. The global burden of disease is what? It's people who go around the world, see what people eat, see what people, how much they smoke, how much they exercise, and then they draw or they calculate the risk of heart disease in this case, or death in this case. So number one killer is diet high in sodium. Then again, the interesting thing here actually is the blue thing, because it's diet low in whole grains. So positive nutrition has a role. Instead of prohibiting things, we should tell people to eat more of the good ones. Okay? So diet high in saturated fat, sugar, processed meat, red meat. Look at red meat. Really, really small effect on mortality. Really small effect on mortality if you do not eat red meat in excess. Do you see saturated fat? No, you don't. It's not even mentioned. So apparently saturated fat has no role in mortality. Again, this is cardiovascular mortality, specifically cardiovascular mortality, diet high in sodium, processed meat, trans fatty acid. And again, the interesting thing here is low consumption of fish. So eat more fish, low vegetables, eat more vegetables, low fiber, eat more fiber. So rather than prohibiting things, maybe we should suggest people to eat more of the good ones. These are two meta-analyses. Again, all saturated fat, total fat. Look at the number of studies. Huge number of studies. If we put them all together, there is really no major effect on cardiovascular disease. This is, I think, the most recent one. Again, slightly significant, but not much. You should be scared of this. Again, this is the huge epic cohort. 10,000 people, 10,000 cardiovascular disease events out of almost 500,000 people. No evidence, again, for association or consumption of total fatty acids with cardiovascular disease. So why is that? We do not eat fat. We eat red meat, we eat butter, we eat cheese, we use olive oil to dress our vegetables. We do not eat just fat, just protein, just sugar. Oh, sometimes we do, but not much. And so maybe it's time for a new approach. Instead of focusing on saturated fat or unsaturated fat or protein, maybe we should focus on legumes that contain protein, fish that contains omega-3, meat, and so forth. So probably the food translation here from saturated fat is necessary. Instead of telling people to avoid saturated fat, maybe we should tell them to avoid some kind of food that contain also saturated fat. For example, if we only focus on saturated fat, saturates are more harmful in the US. Well, why? Probably because they eat more meat. While in Europe, for example, they eat more dairy. And dairy products maybe have a different effect on health than meat. Yes, they all contain saturated fat, but they also contain different things. For example, maybe it's just saturates. So you eat meat and you also eat carnitine, iron. You eat dairy, you also absorb calcium, tripeptides, ACE inhibitors, and also saturated fat. That's what they have in common, but not much. Let's move to a neglected issue, I think. When we cook, we form lipid peroxides. Why? Because of the three major enemies. Light. So these are the free radical reactions. Again, 10 seconds of biochemistry. When you cook, you expose fat to the three major enemies: light, heat, and oxygen. and that forms lipid peroxides. So you absorb lipid peroxides, and lipid peroxides are dangerous to your health. The more double bonds, the more easy for the fat used for cooking to become peroxidized, okay? So maybe use saturated fat for cooking. I know the guidelines do not suggest that, but if you cook with a highly unsaturated fat, a highly unsaturated oil, you increase the formation of lipid peroxides. So maybe using, we are here invited by the Malaysian Palm Oil Council, but maybe using palm oil to cook or to fry, maybe, and it's a big maybe, okay? Until we prove it in humans, we do not know. Might reduce the formation of lipid peroxides. And you would say, what do you mean that palm oil is bad for cardiovascular disease? Well, again, there's no evidence. It makes sense. It makes sense, but when you study human trials, there's no evidence. This is the most comprehensive one on palm oil and cardiovascular disease. And you see, if you substitute palm oil for monounsaturated fat, you have a slight improvement in cardiovascular disease. But if you substitute it for polyunsaturated fat, slightly, almost nothing. Why? Maybe because you form lipid peroxide when you cook. Maybe. So if you really look at the literature, I know I like to provoke some thoughts, but there is no evidence that palm oil is harmful to health. There's no evidence. Some people say it does, some people say it does not, but there's really, collectively, there's no evidence. Final one, we said at the very beginning, palm oil and saturated fat, butter, milk, cheese, all saturated fat increases blood cholesterol, right? And this is why they're harmful, right? Could be. On the other hand, polyunsaturated fat, for example, corn oil lowers blood cholesterol, and I'm not saying that, the law says that. You can put it on a label. You can put on the label of your product that corn oil rich in linoleic acid lowers blood cholesterol. Why? Because it does. Saturated fat increases blood cholesterol, and that's why it's supposed to be harmful. There are two different things. Also, keep in mind that everyone, I was listening to a previous talk on precision nutrition. This is very interesting, and it's the future of nutrition. It's the present of nutrition. So this is an experiment from, I think it was published in 95, so many years ago, or 2005, I can't remember, by Jose Ordovaz. So here they gave people polyunsaturated fatty acids, and the average is that one, okay? It lowers, on average, blood cholesterol. But for some people, it lowers blood cholesterol a lot. For some people, not so much. So some people, just a little bit, and some people didn't understand the experiment. So it actually increases blood cholesterol. And this is the very latest one. It came out, I think, 1 month ago. Same thing. They gave people polyunsaturated fat. Some people decreased blood cholesterol a lot. Some people not much. Some people even increased blood cholesterol. So when we say out loud that the saturated fat increases blood cholesterol, it's true on average, not for everyone. And we miss also, for example, LDL particle size, which might be a risk factor that we often ignore. Why? It's easy to measure blood cholesterol. It's easy to measure LDL, very difficult to measure and expensive to measure LDL particle size. So to make these sweeping statements of the saturated fat increases blood cholesterol, yeah, on average. Okay, these are personal reflections stemming from many decades, unfortunately, of research on fat in general. Do not think that saturated fat per se is harmful. That's old thinking. It's not. But why? This is what Paracelsus said. Everything is poison. Everything is poison. It's the dose that makes the poison. So to avoid saturated fat, to avoid salt, to avoid sugar, does not make sense. You should eat a little of something that might be harmful and should eat more of something that is good for your health. So saturated fat, it's being revisited. It's not as harmful as previously thought. And the only mechanism of action is that it increases blood cholesterol, which is not a good thing. But again, not for everyone, and it depends also on the LDL and cholesterol profile. It's a very heterogeneous class. when you say avoid saturated fat, it depends. The one you find in meat is different than the one you find in cheese, in dairy products, it's in some vegetable oils, in tropical oils. And again, it's very important to lower blood cholesterol, keep it low, keep your LDL cholesterol low, but it's not the only risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And when you put all the data together, you see that eating saturated fat, not in excess, is not associated with cardiovascular disease. So, of course, do not overdo. Oh, they told me that I can eat as much butter as I can. No. Keep it under control, okay? But don't be scared. Don't be scared. Do not avoid saturated fat just because it's harmful for cardiovascular disease. It's unlikely. It's unlikely. I leave you with a little bit of press that if you want to read tonight just to fall asleep, it's a perfect method for falling asleep. This is a summary of most of the things I said, and this again I think it's another thought-provoking paper. Should we focus on salt or should we focus on food that contains salt? We do not eat salt like this. We eat foods high in salt. We eat foods high in saturated fat. We eat foods high in vitamins and so forth. So instead of focusing on just one single component, it's time to go back and focus on the whole diet. And with this one, I would like to thank you very much for listening to me and thank again the Malaysian Palm Oil Council for organizing this session. Thank you again.
Thank you, Francesco, for your nice presentation. Just a quick question. I totally agree with you that we have to focus on foods and not on nutrients. But how much do you think that the digestion of the food matrix can modulate the effect of the nutrients? I mean, we are not digesting everything, you know.
You mean the whole diet?
Yes, I mean, the single food could have a different digestibility. And so they can release different amount of the nutrients. So do you think that we need to go a step ahead, not considering simply the chemical composition, but also the digestibility of the foods?
This is a super important question. And as a pharmacologist by training, I'm trained again to look at a single molecule with a single effect. It's not the case of food, you know. So we go from one molecule which is contained in a food item, which is contained in a diet, which is contained in a lifestyle. So the same, I don't know what to say. Let's say a glass of wine. The same glass of wine contains alcohol, it also contains polyphenols, if you look at carefully, and then all the polyphenols, it contains quercetin, yeah, okay. But then you drink one glass of wine with or without meal, by yourself or with friends, and you drink just one glass of wine or you drink one bottle. So that's something that we often overlook. That's something that we often overlook by studying catechins in green tea, which is very important to study catechins in green tea, super important. But those catechins, you do not take catechins like this, you drink green tea. Okay, it's the same thing. No, it's not. That's okay. Well, 1 minute. That's a discussion I had with the most important European epidemiologist a year ago, Martin Catan from the Netherlands, and we were at a meeting in Portland, Oregon. And he said, it's easy to find out if green tea is good for you or not. We prepare pills, and then we run a trial. What's the problem? It will cost what? $2 million. That's way lower than the salary of the next CEO. And I said, I disagree. One thing is a pill of tea catechins. Another thing is drinking green tea. With meals, for example, after the meal, antioxidants in the stomach. Maybe they're better absorbed, maybe they're not. So again, he was using a reductionist approach, which I also use sometimes. But as you say, we should go back a little bit and look at the whole diet in the whole lifestyle, as a component of the whole lifestyle.
Thank you, Francesco, for this enlightening presentation. As usually, you are provoking some kind of rising ideas. Do you have an idea about the association between genetics, human genetics, like let's say some isozymes involved in saturated fat metabolism, and the effect? Because you show a very huge variation in the response and probably could be associated some epigenetics or some genetics indeed.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
Oh, it's very interesting, and it's something that you should not say out loud, unfortunately. But for example, some people have a genetic profile that underexpresses perilipins, which are proteins that synthesize triglycerides. So if you have that profile, you can eat hamburgers and drink Coca-Cola, no problem. You're not supposed to say that out loud, and I will never say that as a general advice. But some people are not responsive to cheese, meat, milk, you name it, are not as responsive as the other one. So either we do a genetic profiling and then tell people you can eat this or you cannot eat this, or we just shut up and provide general guidelines. No problem. Yeah.